appreciate the heads up on hold. You good? Okay. All right. It is 5:30. Let's call this meeting to order, the work session. Welcome, everyone, to our first taped work session.
Wow.
How about that? Exciting. Taped and televised. Yeah, I'm really excited. All right. Boulevard maintenance, Mr. Mareck.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. So just kind of want to kick off a discussion related to right-of-way and boulevard maintenance. And this is kind of what I'd call an in-the-weeds type of topic that in the city, as far as staff goes and council and our commissions, we're probably familiar with what right-of-way is and how it functions within our general system. But in order to kind of get at the root of the issue that I'd like to tee up for the council for discussion, I wanted to talk about what right-of-way is. And so essentially when a development is platted, streets are platted or right-of-way is platted within that, and streets and boulevard are located within the right-of-way. So it's property that the city owns, but I think the issue is, as you can see on the screen, is a homeowner's property lines will go up to the right-of-way, but as you can tell from that aerial, the right-of-way extends into what someone would commonly think of as their yard. And so in most cases, it's about 10 feet from the back of curb is where the right-of-way ends, but that can vary on the width of the right-of-way through the development, the width of the street, sidewalk placement, etc. So it's going to vary from development to development, or in some cases, street to street. The right-of-way provides the city the rights to locate street pavement, utilities, street lights, street signs, sidewalks, and so basically all the kind of the functions of that. It varies in width. The issue that we're kind of having, and I'll proceed to the next slide, and I wouldn't call it necessarily a significant issue, but we have a ordinance related to sidewalk maintenance within the right-of-way. So it's obviously a city sidewalk, but an ordinance requires someone, and I don't know the number of hours offhand, it's somewhere between 48 and 72, but they have to shovel their sidewalk to keep it free of snow and ice, etc. We enforce that. You have a question, Glenn?
Well, I was going to say, how long is it on average that people don't shovel their sidewalk?
So we don't go out looking for code violations related to shoveling of sidewalks. So it's per complaint basis. Frankly, we don't have the staff to send somebody around and look for that. So I think I mentioned to somebody earlier today, it's probably been at least 2 to 3 years since we've sent out a letter regarding shoveling sidewalk, but I could almost guarantee you that if you give me 5 minutes, I could walk outside and probably find somebody that's violating that. So, I think that's a flaw in kind of the system, but it's also a part of kind of how our ordinances function. I mean, we have many rules and regulations that draw back to an ordinance. If that was a position of the city to go out and do code enforcement and find violations, we certainly could. That hasn't been a priority, both by just kind of input from the council and just available resources. So we have that. The thing that's not concurrent with that or runs parallel is even though sidewalks and grass are both within the boulevard section of that right-of-way, we don't have similar language as it relates to the maintenance, the maintenance of traditional landscaping, whether that be grass. But we're also kind of weak as it relates to placement of, let's say, shrubbery or trees that might impact city's maintenance of the streets, but maybe sight triangles of intersections where if you put maybe a long hedge at an intersection, maybe you can't see the crossbound traffic. And so I do think that there's a space where the council might want to consider adopting an ordinance related to some of those pieces. This has specifically come up in a kind of a couple of instances, one related to as we go through our special assessment process. I think it's really a unique time where people start to talk about how right-of-ways impact their property. So normally you wouldn't think of a right-of-way, but when we start talking about special assessment and where a street's located or reconstructed within that right-of-way, it becomes pretty apparent that that street can move kind of really anywhere within that right-of-way. The city has the right to reconstruct that. But then as the dialogue evolves and it occurs to some residents like, hey, wait a minute, so I'm cutting grass or mowing the lawn on property that's not technically mine. And then there, a conversation, oftentimes tongue-in-cheek will say, well, should I send the city a bill, or should the city start doing that? And, practically the city could, just like some cities look at shoveling, sidewalk systems throughout their entire community. It becomes a reflection of cost, though, where if the city was to hire labor and have the equipment to mow all the city right-of-ways, you'd have an exorbitant cost. So it has become kind of a practice where, there is kind of what I'd call a nice aspect to, it's nice not to have an ordinance for everything. And so people cut their lawns up to their curb. So we traditionally don't have to have an ordinance that says we should cut up to your curb because that's the same thing as a sidewalk. But it can put staff in an uncomfortable situation because we don't have that, and so if someone wants to contest that, we have little wrinkles within our how we cut curb or cut boulevards. So it's kind of a deep detail, but if you remember, Levi Griffin Road, more than half of that road is the right-of-way is all city right-of-way, but the adjacent properties are in Dahlgren Township, except for the Mills property at the end. So the city cuts the right-of-way along Levi Griffin Road in the sections that are township, and Mills takes care of the rest, or Lakeview will take care of that. But from a average property taxpayer perspective, the city's cutting right-of-way along that section, but not in another section. The county has traditionally, I would say 2 to 3 times a year, they'll cut the right-of-way along Jonathan Carver Parkway, and there are times where the city has done it, and I've asked Brian's team to go out there and cut it because I think it looks nicer. We cut it on the Carver Station side. We've asked the CDA to cut theirs, which they have, and the elementary school, but we also have HOAs that have not cut their boulevards since they're in kind of their development has started. And so we'd like to get out of the business where we're cutting some boulevards and not others, and thinking about consistency. And so I think there is an argument that could be made, like, let's take a crack at an ordinance that says this is what we're going to do, this is how we're going to do it, this is our expectations, or this is the responsibility of property owners that are adjacent to road right-of-ways, and what our maintenance standards are, whether it's grass, we already have snow, or planting of trees, placing, one of the things that might go unnoticed is, can I put landscape rock in there? Well, and I haven't discussed that specific detail with Brian, but if you put landscape rock all the way up to the curb, then that rock gets into the street, or different types of landscaping might end up plugging storm sewer drains. So there can be a lot of layers to this. So rather than just taking an ordinance to you and saying, well, this is what we came up with, we want to kind of give you a broad stroke of what the issue is, some of the things to contemplate, just to kind of kick off the discussion, see how you feel about this, answer some questions, have a discussion with the council on the topic.
All right. Any questions?
Do you want to have something, Lori?
I don't have any questions, but definitely like to discuss it.
Sure.
Hear what others are thinking.
Maybe you said some of this or referenced about it, but when we're talking about flowers and landscaping in the right-of-way, I mean, there's, I see a number of houses who plant hostas around their mailboxes or things like that. Is your intent to look at not allowing things like that, or are you just looking for more? I mean, do you have some kind of ideas on which way staff is looking at going?
I would say, excuse me, the primary intent is to deal with mowing consistency.
Okay.
The second piece related to like the landscaping functions that you mentioned would be more related to safety. So we haven't contemplated like this. We would support this. We would have some concerns with. Part of that is based on what we hear from you tonight. Is
Sure.
we're okay with this, or we don't want to get into that much detail because there is a, and maybe these two words don't go together, but there is some type of charm, I think, with like not over-regulating like every piece, because the unintended consequence of that regulation is then you have to be willing, I think, to have somebody enforce it. And are you willing to say, like, for example, like you can't plant these hostas there and then have that argument? So we'd like to be in a position where it's like, we feel like we're really grounded with some good fundamental facts that say, if you plant the 6-foot arborvitae here, you know, that's gonna pose some safety issues, or it's gonna damage our trucks or snowplow or street sweeper, etc. We'd like to have it rooted in that type of kind of philosophy, as opposed to, you know, we're gonna allow wood chips but not landscape rock or something like that.
Okay, good. I'm glad to hear that from you, that to not be so overly heavy-handed, that, you know, like you said, we look to enforce them. We have to enforce. And I think that having some uniqueness to people's, you know, boulevards is okay, and that's a good thing to say. If you want to plant some pretty flowers around your mailbox, that actually looks better than just the grass that's growing up next to it. So I would like to, just from what we've heard, or what I've heard so far, is I would like to make sure that things like that would have a chance. And then for streetscape, when we're talking about trees, I'll call them barrier trees, like you're saying arborvitae, or when you're looking at, you know, evergreen trees, obviously that would be a site barrier. But I think the overstory of other trees to be able to grow over actually adds some charm. I mean, if we look at 6th Street and things like in other places in town where that overstory grows over, I think that's a nice look. So I would hate to say no trees, period, in the boulevard, but I can completely understand what we'll call barrier trees to be there. So I guess that's my initial thoughts on what we've heard. Glenn?
Well, let's take 6th Street, particularly my house. I have binder rock. I got 90 tons of binder rock in my front yard. I put it there because I can't keep the lawn there because from all the salt and stuff. And I specifically put it below the curb height so it wouldn't end up out in the street. But I can see where in other areas of town, if there's like a 4-foot, 5-foot boulevard there, not only just rock, but the shrubbery. Shrubbery's kind of tough because if people plant it there, usually they're going to keep up the maintenance on it, as well with grass. That's just kind of the common sense approach. But I can see where it can become an issue for the maintenance crews.
I don't have any other further comments. I mean, I think it's okay if we take up an ordinance and enhance it around mowing grass, just like shoveling sidewalk, right? So if there are complaints, we can point to an ordinance. But I'm with the rest of the council in saying I don't really want to regulate what's happening in that boulevard space. I do think there's a fair point about landscaping not interfering with safety and sightlines specifically. I think that's a fair thing to incorporate into an ordinance. But that's my thought. Madam Mayor, if I may. Similar sentiments, especially what Ms. McKnight said about with safety and a line of sight, but that there be something in place for ordinance around the mowing. I also think we'll find it useful as we're going to have an increase in homeowner associations to have something to just keep things looking consistent. And, you know, if need come or be that we would have to enforce anything to keep things looking consistent, that would assist us having an ordinance in place.
Yeah. I agree with everything that you all have said. I think that a mowing ordinance is called for the reasons, Brent, that you laid out. I also kind of agree with the the safety aspects of an ordinance of not having barrier trees, as Christy said. I do like it. I think it's really charming. I don't know that we have any folks in downtown Carver, but I know there are some folks in downtown Chaska that have a little flowering garden in the boulevard between the sidewalk and the curb. And I think when those are maintained, those are gorgeous.
When they're maintained.
When they're maintained.
Yes.
And generally, if people care enough to expand
Plant
their
it,
gardens
they're gonna
outside
maintain
of,
it.
they'll maintain it. That said, if you get a gigantic hosta that's impeding with sight lines, you know, I certainly see the safety aspects of that, so. Does anybody else have any more comments?
If we are gonna look into like plantings and stuff like that, maybe we can limit it to shrubbery only being X feet high off the ground or something, for the simple fact that it might interfere with a sight line. So if they're taking like some arborvitaes and stuff like that, global arborvitaes I know can grow to 6 feet, 8 feet tall, that would be a sightline issue. So I think if we limit the height,
Related to sightlines?
Yes.
That's probably
I mean,
nice and generic.
well, when people are planting flowers and stuff like that, hostas aren't going to grow 6 feet,
No.
but
Sunflowers will.
yes, they will, and they would start to impede. But I think if we limit to some type of height so that it doesn't impede any of the sight lines, that'd be a good thing.
I think the one thing, and I don't think I specified in enough detail, but something to have you on your radar is there's a couple of HOAs that have traditionally not mowed, along with some single-family homes along County Road 11. So I would say 99.9% of the residents are going to continue to mow their lawns as they have been for years, decades, etc. But there are going to be those couple of HOAs, and I would say about a dozen properties along Jonathan Carver Parkway that are going to have new maintenance standards. You're going to be asking them, if we proceed with this, to cut that lawn, that right of way along the county road to the curb of the county road, where if you can think about that visually, you know, there's a kind of the end of their property, the county Road 11 trail or JCP trail, and then the curb, and so it's a different set of circumstances than, you know, mowing to the edge of Sunny Ridge or Sugar Maple or High Street, etc. So I think because those folks would be impacted at some point, those are the folks you'll hear from. And so I just want to broach that subject with the council in advance and get your reaction to that and see if you're comfortable with that.
I have a question about that county road. So you said that the county, I know, but because I've seen it or not seen it be done, but the county only mows a couple of times a year. Is there any reason that they don't do it more often? Is there something nesting? Is there some kind of environmental reason that they don't, you know, some bird might be nesting or something might be going on in there or some critter?
They do it based on what I've discussed this with them. I don't know if this is their official statement, but they do it just for safety reasons. So they don't do it for aesthetics, and so they'll do it the least amount of times possible to maintain a certain standard, but they won't cut it at a certain length.
Okay, so it's not tied to any kind of wildlife management of any type?
No.
Okay, thank you.
I do have a reaction to Brent's comment, which is something I didn't think about. When we get what's still city limits, but I kind of think that country look. Could there be something in the ordinance that would almost give it, not a grace period, but if somebody had a certain size of lot or like a certain number of acres, that maybe that wasn't required to maintain the grass between or in that right of way versus in a city lot, you know, what I think of.
So if
It's kind of a different manicured yard look versus, you know, you're getting out kind of that country feel. And sometimes those are
Right.
lots, large acres. And I just, and
So
it
if we're
blends in,
being
it
more-
blends in better in those areas, even though on a map they're city limits, but they don't really have that look.
So if the county is charged with already mowing on their county roads, and we'll just use County Road 11 as the example, so then we would be being more restrictive than what the county has, because the county doesn't require it. Would be requiring it because they're in the city limits.
I mean, you could, you could theoretically say, we're only gonna do this for city right away. Because in the one thing that, the unintended consequence of that is, if, let's say the next topic is, you know, Erin's gonna be talking about United Properties, if they didn't cut that right of way, if it was only cut 3 times a year, it's gonna look pretty shaggy. It could look pretty shaggy, and is that what you want? Because I think you could certainly say we're not going to provide ordinance pieces related to county road right away, but then, you know, at least for now, you have sections of 4th Street and Main Street that are on county roads that are in city limits. It's easy to think of 11, but
Is that until we reach 5,000 population?
correct.
We're almost there, so.
Right.
And
I guess
again,
yeah.
99% of the folks are going to continue to mow. People aren't, John Von Walter's not going to let his grass grow up in the boulevard to, a foot.
I guess I would be more inclined to look at saying city streets. It's always something that can be revisited as we grow and get larger, and she has public comment. I don't know if we can take that.
What was that, Christie? Do we need to
It looks like
ask
there's
for
public
public comment
I don't
Is that
know if we do
appropriate?
take public comment or not.
for a work session?
We generally don't.
Yeah,
during a
traditionally
work
the
session.
this is the council's setting. It's your prerogative, but
Come on up, Lori.
Christie had a question about the county mowing. And I sat last year on DOT meetings, otherwise I wouldn't know this either. Brent is exactly right that they'll do it for safety, but they do choose, with state statute, certain times of the year due to things that are nesting.
Okay.
It's not always perfect, and they're stretched with resources just like your city staff is. However, they do follow those.
So they do follow some wildlife management rules, so maybe we need to check on that with the county too.
And it's recommended with DNR. However, within city limits, cities have the right to do what they wish to do with their right-of-way.
Sure.
But again, this is county right-of-way. It's not city right-of-way.
Thank you for that.
So are we primarily thinking about the HOAs on County Road 11 and Jonathan Carver? Like between the trail and County Road 11, that whole, there's some areas in there that are 20 feet wide.
correct.
And they only mow when they basically for safety, but they won't elaborate on what their safety.
I haven't had a specific discussion with the county on what it is. This is just by conversations I've had with different members of their team throughout the years.
So, I'm comfortable with enforcing the ordinance universally. I think if it's something that's within the city limits, it should be. That's the purpose of an ordinance, right? Is to have something that's
Universal,
unilaterally
yep.
enforced
Yep.
and that can be applied to my house as well as Christie's, as well as Glenn's and everyone around here, as well as, everyone in our community. So I don't have any issues with that. I think my question is, when I kind of think of those areas, I don't necessarily think of that. This is getting into the weeds, literally. Sorry. But, that's not
Topic is in the
grass
weeds.
per se, that's more wild area. So what if folks called that a native grass?
I'm thinking the
Area
milkweed
that wouldn't
patch.
be-
Be landscaping. Pollinators.
You
That
know,
would be landscaping, and then it would fall to is it causing a sightline issue?
so would that be something that we need to keep in mind too in this ordinance, because beyond we've lived here for 10 years and we've never had to mow it argument, the other argument will be it's not grass, it's native, it's prairie, it's.
Yeah, and we do have a ordinance related to, or ordinance language related to prairie grasses. I think I'm getting the sentiment. Selfishly, I'm gonna try to stay away from that specific of a detail, because I don't want to put a member of our team in a position where they're maybe debating whether or not something's a prairie grass or not, because there are standards related to how those are maintained that can't be maintained, and even if it, let's say there were some elements to prairie grass, in order to, in that specific location, the property owner doesn't have the right to do maintenance to that degree within the county road right of way. The county wouldn't allow that, and so there might be, I'm gonna follow up with county staff and talk about what they're comfortable with, and maybe in the interim, maybe we need to figure out a workaround County Road 11, because that seems to be the one off here, and it might impact how we approach this ordinance. But I'm hearing that the council is interested in developing something related to this. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's fair.
Brent, could you get some clarification from the county on their mowing timing when it comes to
Yep.
whatever they're managing there with the wildlife? I'd like to know that.
Is this an ordinance that would go through the planning commission first?
No, it's not a land use ordinance, so it's
Oh, okay.
just,
I didn't know where this fell. Thank you.
I don't believe this is in the zoning, no.
Right. Okay, everybody good?
Good.
All right,
Got what you need, Brent?
Yep, thank you.
Okay.
all right. Moving on to the United Properties discussion. Ms. Smith?
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor and Council. Tonight, we're staying pretty high level with the United Properties piece that we recently saw for annexation on January 7th. So on the screen right now is a really rough concept of what they might be proposing to do. So there are a couple plans that have come in for concept plan for the gas convenience user, which is outlined in yellow. That's going to come before you on March 4th at the concept level. So we're not even at that point yet. Planning Commission is reviewing it on Thursday. You'll see it on March 4th. So as you recall, annexation was reviewed on the 7th, concept plan will come on the 4th, and then we'll continue with the preliminary plat, rezoning, and final plat process, which is anticipated late spring of 2019. We are under the impression that United Properties will likely ask for rezoning from ag, which is the default when any property is annexed, to freeway commercial with a planned commercial development, or a PCD overlay. So a PCD is similar to a planned residential development overlay, where you can have some flexibility in the strict zoning code. It's typically for reasons to give you optimal site design, so thinking about open spaces, some access. If we can make the site better somehow through that PCD compared to what's currently in the strict zoning, we'll likely move forward with the PCD. One of the big questions, I think, moving forward with this piece is going to be the traffic study. What does traffic look like coming in and out of the site, how it relates to Jonathan Carver Parkway? So as we continue down this path, we'll start to dig into the traffic study. We'll bring some of the numbers to you so you can review them and move forward in confidence that those boxes have been checked.
Can I ask a quick question and interrupt?
Yes.
When you say traffic study, this is the traffic study that we've been working on for the better part of last year, not one specific to this project?
No, so it's
A new one.
specific to this site. So the traffic study United Properties will submit will be for a full build out of the site. So it'll consider every use that's going to be on there. What does that look like at peak hours, so both AM and PM? What does it mean for stacking? So the county has been really involved with this traffic study, so it's likely going to mirror some of the information that we'll get with the JCP study, but the one submitted for United Properties is site-specific to this one.
Thank you.
Sure.
Just to clarify, will it include information about the residential development to the west as well?
So Meridian Fields actually required its own traffic study, so
Okay, so we can-
Westwood did both, so
Okay.
they meld
Can put 'em
together pretty
together.
well. Yes.
Perfect,
So
thank you.
we'll continue likely, depending on how the United Properties piece shakes out, to require traffic studies at intersections that we think may change based on development. So a little bit about the existing conditions. So it's the property in the southwest corner of Jonathan Carver Parkway and Highway 212. So it has great access and visibility from 212. We're working with the county right now to determine some of those accesses. So one of the big ones will be if there is a right hand only into the site coming off Jonathan Carver Parkway. and then additional access from the construction of Monroe Drive, which is going in with the Meridian Fields. So as the site continues to progress, as Meridian Fields continues, Monroe Drive will start to look like that collector street that we've been thinking about for a while. So the site is directly north of Carver Elementary, adjacent to Ironwood Park, and then Meridian Fields is the residential development west of the site. So thinking through what our roles and responsibilities are. So first and foremost, we provide guidance to the development team. We've started some of those conversations at this point, just back and forth, thinking through some of the big ideas. Typically, staff knows some interesting tidbits about sites that a developer might not know coming in first thing. So the first thing that we do is we guide them, thinking about what we know about the site, how we want it to develop. We additionally review the submitted plans, so we ensure compliance with the city codes and standard detail plates. Review is completed by engineering, public services, planning, the fire marshal, so all of that comes together in the review process back and forth with the United Properties team. We provide notice and information to residents and community members. If someone's watching this meeting either live or in the future, there is a page on the city's website that will stay updated with some of this information. So it's a good spot if someone's interested in this project to check out our website often. The review goes both through the Planning Commission and City Council. The public hearing is held for that rezoning, so notice is provided to 350 feet and held by the Planning Commission. We'll draft and execute the developer's agreement, which we've been talking about quite a bit, thinking about some of our residential developments. So similar process, but with a commercial lens. And we'll monitor and inspect the site for compliance with the approved plans. So once we get that final plan set, we make sure that the site is developed in accordance with those plans. So we know it's underground in 10 years when we have to go back and repair it based on those plans. So thinking about some things that we know and things that we unfortunately don't know but could speculate at right now. So something that we do know, the property is likely to develop with commercial users. So that was guided as a commercial use since the 2008 comprehensive plan. Additionally, in the design Carver plan, it stayed commercial. So the United Properties Group is not looking for a comprehensive plan amendment. They're anticipating commercial users across the site. So thinking about that in relation with our zoning code. So this is where it gets a little vague. The permitted uses within that district are retail sales, personal service businesses, and essential services. So if a user comes in on the site and falls within that category, it's a permitted use under both the commercial guidance and the zoning code. So thinking about what those users could be, we're hearing a lot about the gas convenience user that the Planning Commission is going to review on Thursday. You'll review March 4th. But then it could be a plethora of users. It could be small retail, so whether that be small business owners or it could be a large anchor. So it could be a Target, a Walmart, a Sam's Club, any gamut. We don't know at this time. But if it meets both the guidance and the zoning code, it's permitted. A recent example is Carver Square. So if you think about how that site developed under the planned commercial district, this will be similar. So it's likely that it's going to come in phases. So Carver Square came in with 4 different projects at 4 different times. So we write that rezoning ordinance or the PCD, and we typically amend it each time there's a new user. So first will likely be that gas convenience user. As the site continues to develop, we'll continue with that PCD ordinance, but add some information on each time there's a new user. So the unknowns.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Yes.
So when you're talking about a gas station, is this one that we're looking at with like, do we know yet will be like a car wash and gas station?
So the concept that the Planning Commission is reviewing does include a car wash.
Okay, thanks.
Sure. So unknowns about the site, which can be a little maddening if you think about it a little too much. So it's the end users. So we can talk a lot about the types of users, but we don't have any say of what they actually are. So we can hope and wish and think and talk about different users, but if they're not a willing partner at the table, we can't be the people who say, you know, we really prefer Coca-Cola to Pepsi, so we'll only take places that serve Coke. So thinking about the end users, we don't know at this time. An additional unknown is the timing of the full build-out of the site. So the first concept, the gas convenience, is likely to be in, if everything goes according to plan, likely this fall, but then it could take United Properties some time to get some of those other users. So the market largely drives it if they have interested people who are looking for a site. So thinking about the big unknowns, the end users, and then the timing. So points of discussion tonight, I'm going to ask that you keep it pretty high level, not to dive into the concept that if you've reviewed the Planning Commission packet, you might have some additional details on. But as we think about moving forward with Design Carver, the comprehensive plan, one of the requirements is that we ensure that our zoning code meets the Design Carver plan. So we'll need to start thinking about our commercial, industrial land use. So thinking about design specifications, signage specifications. What are some of our guiding principles that we want to see in these areas that are marked as red and purple on the zoning map? So thinking how we can get great users that function in the community but also look cohesive and are approachable to the community. Another one that's interesting with a project like this is branding. So if you think about commercial developments in other communities like the Chaska Commons or West End in St. Louis Park, it's pretty easy to know when someone says one of those, the general area that you're thinking about. So part of the discussion can absolutely be branding. A couple of the plan sheets that you have call out Carver Creek Commons as the development name. We're working through that with the developer right now based on some feedback from the council previously that we have a lot of Carver and we have a lot of creek.
We do.
So trying,
Chaska has a
I
comment.
saw that and thought, we could diversify.
right. So that's something that we're working on at a staff level with the developer, trying to find some common threads that we can find before we bring it forward to you. And then the upcoming reviews and next steps. So again, concept plan is anticipated. Preliminary plat, rezoning, and final plat are likely going to run together. So it's the rezoning, preliminary plat, and final plat. So having it just be one gas convenience user, the site isn't anticipated to change much. Our zoning code allows for it. And that's anticipated, if everything goes perfectly to the aggressive timeline that we have set out, it will likely be May, June for the council to review.
And would we have the results of the traffic study by that time?
Yes, I would like to, we have the traffic study. We haven't had full time to review the entire document, but as we start having these conversations, that will definitely be part of the guiding principles of the site.
Okay.
Erin, when you talk about branding, and maybe Brent, this is something that you might want to chime in on since you were here, that and Erin, you weren't. But up by Mills Fleet Farm, we have a monument sign that says Downtown Carver with an arrow. Is this another opportunity where we can have that, I don't know if we consider that branding or promotion for ourselves, exactly which we want to call it, but is that something we could look at for that too?
Yes and no. So yes, I think that's would be a great idea. The no part would come into, that'd be something we could incorporate into our 2020 budget.
Okay.
But it wouldn't be something that we could ask them at this point to incorporate into their plans.
Right, because the city paid for the last one, is that correct? It wasn't a developer.
Well, that was put in as a part of the whole city project because we funded that project.
Okay.
We took out the bond and had the contractor. These improvements are being put in privately.
Okay.
And so we just don't have the same type of opportunity. But it is a point of discussion that we had at a staff level of as far as creating another one of those pieces since we'll have such a high traffic volume coming out of this development.
Okay, thanks.
We could call it Monroe Commons. On Monroe Street. Or whatever the name is.
I have another question. So when we're doing the planned commercial district versus the strict zoning, as you mentioned, is there something we're losing? I mean, if we're going from what's strict into this, why? Can I, a little bit more about why?
Sure. So on commercial sites, specifically, things that are important could be open space. So if we're thinking about a commercial site, I think 75% can be impervious surface or hard cover. So if we're able to get a feature on the site that's preserved and we're at 76%, but we're able to save a wetland, mature trees, that's a spot where we could say we're getting optimal site design through that, but it doesn't adhere to the strict zoning code. So it's typically, if there's a reason for it, we can say, yes, that gives you optimal site design. It also allows us to think a little bit closer. So since there's the rezoning ordinance, we have the opportunity to add some language into it specific to this site. So if you think about like residential development, it's often the setbacks that change. So that setbacks could also change here, but it's typically for optimal site design. It's not usually to cram another user on the site or to say, hey, we could fit this big box user if you let us go on 2 of these things. So,
Is there anything that you've identified right now that, to push it to that PCD, that we want to look at keeping that's
Sure.
really important up there?
So the site right now, as proposed, we saw an updated site plan with the developer this morning. There's a private street that runs through, which would be favorable to the city if we didn't maintain the street on this site. Just with plowing, it would be independent. They also would maintain areas like signs and common spaces, so it would be similar to an HOA, but a business design of it. So with the private street, if they do move forward with that concept, they're asking for a setback to be reduced. So it would be closer to the private street, so not public, not typical with the city's spec. The city would not be responsible for maintenance, repair, reconstruction.
So then is that still something that has to be approved by the fire marshal department for width for emergency? Okay.
Yep, and they also check like turning radiuses, which is always really interesting, making sure their largest truck would be able to get onto the site successfully.
Okay. Are there any wetlands or trees or anything like that, natural things that we're looking at right now?
There aren't many trees on the site. It's pretty bare. I know that there is a wetland on the site that they're doing some work on to figure out the degree of what the wetland is, if it's incidental to farming that was completed on the site for many, many years, or if it is a naturally occurring wetland.
Okay, but that would give us the opportunity with this PCD then to save that if it was of high quality?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
I'm on this similar topic. On the map that has the 2 pond areas, potential public-private, is it just too early to decide if it's going to become public or stay private?
Sure.
I'm sorry, can you say that again? It was slipping through and I don't.
Yeah, she just pulled it up. Those 2 areas that have potential pond area, it's public/private. So can we give guidelines on some of that, or is that really just for drainage, or is it actually to preserve and be nice looking?
Sure. So the ponds that are proposed on the site in this image are for drainage. Something that's interesting about the site is we need some drainage with Monroe. We need somewhere for that water to go. The county needs some drainage for the Jonathan Carver Parkway widening project, and then the site needs drainage. So that's the public-private partnership. So we would essentially take those 3 things together and have 1 large pond instead of 3 small ponds for different users. So the city typically maintains ponds in an outlot, so it cuts down that maintenance requirement from 3 tiny ponds that could have a plethora of issues to 1 unified pond that likely saves money and then also saves resources in the long run.
So for this concept plan, it would be a partnership. It's not that it's undecided.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
I was viewing it the other way. Okay.
Either or.
Correct.
Got it.
Any other comments, questions?
I do, but I didn't know, do you have more in the presentation?
No, that's it for this one.
Oh, okay. On this slide, on the top right where it says proposed county road improvements,
Sorry, what was that?
on the top right, it says proposed county road improvements.
Yes.
And then below it, the line says proposed county row, right away.
Correct.
Okay. I would like to see work towards, within the concept plan, a pedestrian walkway, or ideally, a bridge. Yeah. And if we can,
A bridge where?
I would think Monroe Drive, because that is going to be a collector street, and just knowing what is to the west of here, ball fields, southwest, the school. I mean, ideally, if we can give some guidance on a bridge that was accessible with the ramp so that it stays handicap accessible, bike route,
You're
stroller.
talking about a bridge over County Road 11? Is that what you
Yes.
mean?
Over County
I
Road
think
11?
Erin needs to rein us in.
Trying
Erin needs to rein us
make
in.
sure I
Save
was
us.
understanding what you're.
So number 1, in the brief review of the traffic study, it's anticipated that a temporary signal is going to go at Monroe and Jonathan Carver Parkway day 1, when the gas convenience store opens. So that will make that a controlled intersection should people want to cross there.
So is it temporary signal, the flashing orange, or stoplight?
So it will just be on wood poles. So thinking about a stoplight that is a wood pole with wire across, when Jonathan Carver Parkway gets expanded, they'll be more permanent then.
Okay.
But day one, the gas convenience user and Meridian Fields, it broke, that they will need a temporary signal. Something else to note, with this additional piece of information, I don't foresee why people would choose to cross at that location with the underpass at County Road 11 that we have at the end of Cherry Circle. So it's the cul-de-sac closest to Jonathan Carver Parkway, just south of Monroe. There's an underpass. Sorry, in the future.
Okay, thank you.
And additionally, I'm not sure that we could require United Properties to do work outside of their property for a pedestrian bridge, which typically can run about $140,000.
If that ever was to come to fruition and there was, partnership with the county on it, would now be the time though to get access to that land or have the outlot right away? So just so that we don't in the future say, oh, I wish we could have put that there.
So thinking about a landing spot to the east, it's private property on both sides, so it's two existing home sites. So to have an ADA accessible overpass, I'm going to say there likely isn't room due to the existing.
Then what if it was just one with the steps?
I would say it still would be
Not enough
really,
room?
really tight.
But if we're going to have two underpasses there, right? Because you said we have one that's proposed.
It's proposed, yes.
So rather than looking to build up and over, we will already be ADA compliant with going under. So just knowing what that bridge can cost, if there was something possibly that we could receive grant funds, then I would be more inclined to want to
I
look
still,
at that. But I think for me personally, I think the underpass, having two of those, and it can take care of that. And then for, I guess I'm going to call it site pollution, I'm sorry. But if we have underground passes, then to put something over, for me personally, isn't probably my favorite.
I still favor bridge. Some people aren't comfortable with the underpass, especially certain hours or, this time of year when we're losing the daylight, or early walkers, late joggers.
Are they lit?
Some people aren't, they are lit, but some people aren't comfortable having their children go or just go by themselves. But I also think the bridge can be, when we talk about branding, you can have the sign, welcome to Carver. I mean, I think there's things you can do with it. It's more about, do we have the land and room and who's going to pay for it? But this early in a concept, I would just still like to see it entertained and just see if the developer is interested.
I think we have to be really careful. We're still kind of in the early phases with the developer, and say, like, here's something that is going to increase your cost substantially, because, and especially when there's plans for kind of other means of crossing. I just think we need to be really careful to kind of stay within our.
Well, I don't know what the
We
developer
know-
incentive would be to put money towards that since it's not on their property.
And maybe it's not them that would pay for it. Maybe it's at the county or a grant or a.
And I like the idea that if at some point in time a bridge were to go over, that yes, that would be a great branding piece to say something Carver across, because you see that on 212 right now with Chaska. Mm-hmm.
We have
Is
that
that-
opportunity when the bridge goes across 212, right? Between 43, right on the big.
I don't know why we wouldn't get
Remember
the
that one?
same
Making
opportunity.
a big name. Sorry.
That second underpass, is that, what's the time frame? Who's paying for it? Are we at risk of that not happening?
I would say you're always at the risk of something not happening. I'd also say that, so that's within the corridor study, so that has every intention of being a planned improvement that would coincide with when 11 is improved from 6th Street to 212, so that's planned for 2021, 2022. The data, and I don't have the source, but just from conversations anecdotally with rec folks, apparently there's some study out there that people tend to use those bridges less, and they tend to use the underpasses more, so that's an anecdotal piece. And then Second piece, and I don't know if Quinn is ready to comment on it, I do think we have the ability to talk about funding opportunities with other partners like Carver County if we want to look at a bridge rather than underpass. I do think the path is a lot narrower or completely blocked if we would somehow create a condition of approval that they construct a pedestrian bridge or underpass, frankly. Is that fair to say, Quinn?
In terms of they being the developer?
Correct.
Right. And I think for reasons someone mentioned before, because it's not really directly associated with the site, how much we can push it in terms of improvements that aren't directly impacted by the site is difficult right now, and there's been some new case law and things like that looking at that sort of concept. So we would definitely need to tread carefully if we were to explore that.
But to Councilmember Sayers' point, I think we could, as the corridor study wraps up, hopefully at some point, I think we could broach that conversation and say, would the council/community rather have a pedestrian bridge rather than an underpass? I'm not going to speculate on all the engineering details that go into that or the costs. But I think that would be a great opportunity to have that conversation.
I think any cost that's associated with each that would be turned back on the residents and taxpayers should be aligned with that question. So if you're going to say, okay, do you want the overpass or would you prefer the underpass? I think the dollar amount that would be charged back to, if it affects the home, you know, your taxes, then I think that people should understand. Because if you pose questions, you might say, oh, I love that, you know, whatever it is. But if I suddenly say, oh, I love that, and then they come back and say, great, well, now you owe me $1 million, I'm going to say, you know what, I don't think I love that as much. So I think that would be fair to have those numbers kind of attached to it, so people could understand what the payments personally might come from them.
Erin, maybe to get us a little bit back on track, why don't you remind us what you need from us tonight?
Sure. So there's no formal action. This was a little bit of a primer, thinking about commercial development moving forward, and then starting to think about these united property decisions. So when it comes before you on March 4th, just to give you a little bit background, thinking about the site, thinking about some of these guiding principles that we're going to ask from the developer. So nothing formal, nothing major, just a little primer.
So I'm sorry, remind me, from March 4th, you expect us to see both preliminary plat and final plat?
Just concept.
Just concept. Okay, great. So we'll get another concept, more
Yep.
detailed concept.
We'll start
review.
digging into that gas convenience user, how it lays out on the site, what it looks like.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
In the concept, is there plans for a trail running from the school property all the way up the west side of Jonathan Carver Parkway to basically 212?
Yes, in short, in conjunction with the corridor study.
Thank you.
Is there an existing sidewalk on one, or trail on one side of that bridge there?
Side of that.
Over
On the
212?
west side,
There's a west
Is
side.
there?
on the west
Yeah.
side.
Sidewalk
The
Okay.
west side,
The west
there's
side.
a connection.
Okay,
There's no
so it
trail
connect
to
up through
connect to
there.
that right now.
Pardon?
So it would connect up through
Yep.
Correct.
to that bridge? Okay.
We have a trail to Fleet Farm, and then it stops. Well, Fleet Farm down, and then a trail to nowhere again.
Yes.
But they come with development, so.
Back to Christie's point regarding the signs. We have the one Carver
Oh,
with the arrow sign.
Downtown
We
Carver.
also have the Carver sign on the northwest side of Jonathan Carver Parkway, and would that be a little bit, I think that'd look a lot better than just a regular, the one boulevard sign that we have.
So you're saying a full, like a monument?
Yeah, a
And,
monument.
That's
Like,
the one with the plantings up there. something like
yes. We could either on the corner up by the intersection up there.
that. As another, almost, an entrance spot to say,
Yeah.
here, you're here.
Yep.
I think it's a good opportunity with the development to consider that kind of branding. Absolutely.
That's all.
Anyone else?
Can you clarify that, Glenn? Are you talking about a monument sign for the development or like a Carver monument sign?
Carver monument sign.
Yeah, like a welcome to Carver or
Yeah,
Carver or,
it's on,
So that would be, again, that would be a city cost.
correct.
yes, it will.
Could we plan for that space as part of this development?
Well, I think we could, yeah, well, you'd likely, I defer to Erin, I guess, but when I look at it, you'd probably put it in the park property or the north side of the school property as opposed to so you could see it southbound rather than going northbound, because that's kind of the entrance. I will say that at least, I think it was back in 2010 or 11 when we put that in. I want to say from memory that sign was upwards of $75,000, so.
Yes, it was.
So my just first thought about that is I think we want to be careful about, so we're putting that as kind of to indicate the gateway of Carver, and we have one in the general vicinity of
On the
Fleet
north
Farm,
side,
right?
yes.
But then we'd have one in the general vicinity of Brand X here, whatever goes in and is the anchor, or whatever that may be. Don't we want Carver to be more than just kind of the home of Brand X and Fleet Farm and kind of showcasing, like that's a showcase piece, you know, like don't we want it to kind of,
Well,
that's on the edge of more of our.
if you're coming south on Jonathan Carver Parkway, you're going to be able to see the United Properties, you're going to see Meridian, you'll be able to see the school with a big Carver sign there.
One could argue if you don't know you're in Carver at that point, you probably need to get a new GPS. But just playing devil's advocate, it's a broader discussion and not one for tonight.
Yes.
But I want to just be careful that that's not, we've got so much more in Carver, and that it doesn't become our gateway to, here's another commercial area of Carver.
So Chaska, our border with Chaska is across the street from the Carver sign on Levi Griffin, correct?
Correct.
So I think, and if I'm just trying to remember, maybe off, but I may not be, is that the intent was to have that there because you are actually entering the city of Carver, where here, you're not necessarily entering, you're already in Carver at this point. So I think they look wonderful, but I think that we should maybe keep those more edge-bound to let people know that they've entered. Sorry, Glenn.
I also think this would be like a great, because this is kind of I would say, an unfinished topic as it relates to strategic planning and our goal-setting session, and talk
That's
about,
a good idea.
you know, some of Council Member Henry's points about how we want to be branded and where, and then create a coordinating budget of how we're going to put these pieces in over time, because I think they are significant. That's one of the reasons we haven't really done this exercise with the council, where we've brought the concept prior to the concept being brought to the Planning Commission. But, you know, this is an area that people are going to identify with Carver as much, if not more, than our downtown, because it's off of 212, and that's
A lot of traffic.
people's first experience with Carver that maybe have never been here. And so what Jonathan Carver Parkway looks like, which is akin to the corridor study that we are doing, and then what this United Property site looks like, the elementary school, Carver Station, all those pieces are going to generate another set of visual components to what people feel Carver is. And so it'll be good to have some strategic conversation with the council on what you want that to be. But this was kind of a preview into that, because this isn't what I'd call a normal commercial development. There's so much more with this and how it represents the community for many years.
Can you make sure to include something then on 40 and 61 that comes into town? Because that's a big way of people coming into Carver also.
I think we should talk about all the entry points.
Yeah, but I think that one's important
Agreed.
today, because those are, you know, we're looking at what's the traffic patterns are right now for sure. And for sure, coming from 212 Levi Griffin and that 40-61 corner they're the highly trafficked ones.
It's like deja vu all over again.
All right. Okay. Erin, did you get what you needed from us for that? Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Moving on to food trucks in city parks. Ms. Smith.
Thank you. I don't have any slides, so I'm going to go to, okay, that's a good one. So the city has been approached with a concept to have what we're calling right now a semi-permanent food truck in community park. So thinking about daytime population, that parking lot is typically pretty empty, and there's been a community member that's identified that would be a great space to have either a drive-up or a walk-up food truck idea. So food trucks are traditionally in the community for special events, so it's usually with the shops being open downtown, steamboat days, etc. It's not something we typically permit really heavily just because it's for a couple of days. It's in conjunction with some type of celebration. No harm, no foul is typically the approach that the city has taken. So this is a little bit different, thinking about if someone wanted to be there on a more regular basis. So there's some language in the city code under the peddlers, hawkers, solicitors, and transient merchants section. So if you think about this as a transient merchant, that's where it starts to feel a little bit sticky with our city code, since it doesn't really apply to this situation. So some of the big questions that we're looking for feedback on would be consistency. If we do allow a semi-permanent truck in community park or any city park for that matter, how long would it be for? How many days out of the calendar year? The impacts on it of the community. So if you think about a food truck, if they're going to be in a community for a significant amount of time, that can impact local businesses, and they typically don't contribute to the city's tax base. So the food truck typically would not connect to city services. So water, sewer likely wouldn't be paid to the city depending on how self-contained the truck is, but again, likely would not contribute to the city's tax base. And then thinking through some of these ideas, the permitting and policy decisions. So is it a certain number of trucks, certain days of the week? Is it on a 6-month basis? If we decide to move forward with some of those policy decisions and the council's favorable to that idea, we'll need to create some type of ordinance and permitting process that's a little more robust than what we have now, since our city code right now doesn't speak so specifically to something that would be in a city park on a more regular basis than the typical food truck.
All right, opening it up to discussion.
Happy to start.
Go ahead.
Here's my thoughts. I am not interested in seeing a semi-permanent food truck in a community park adjacent to a residential area. I have a lot of concerns about that. If it were, I know I've seen semi-permanent food trucks in Chaska, but they've typically been on commercial lots, not on city park or adjacent to residential areas, I guess is what I'm saying. And so, I mean, I would be in favor of a permitting on, maybe a maximum of a 3-day basis kind of thing, so it's not a semi-permanent, because I think you would want to align those food trucks with activities that are happening in that, adjacent to that community park. One of the things that concerns me about having a food truck in community park specifically is we have a lot of sports organizations that utilize that park heavily, and I think rely upon the concessions. And that would be a conflict of interest, I think. And so I don't know how we get around that, but I wouldn't want to, I would want to make sure that those sports organizations are protected, right? And then we don't allow food truck permitting on those days.
Their proceeds.
I was trying
Yeah.
I was trying to
That's my
figure out
concern.
what semi-permanent food truck would be.
Sure, so that would likely be one of the policy decisions made at the council level to give us some feedback about what you would be comfortable with, what that would mean. It typically would be a self-contained truck, no foundation, would be able to be moved if it needed to be. But some of the information, like Councilmember McKnight shared, duration, days, consistent days, would all be policy level.
Would they be there 24/7 for 4 days if the ordinance said 4 days? Would they be on the property for the,
They could, yeah.
Yeah, they could be.
okay? And when I went through the, your transient merchant ordinance, person selling any merchandise, is food considered merchandise?
So that's probably the biggest flaw, is that a food truck doesn't fit super closely with anything in the city code. So,
It's
this one
my
is more
understanding,
applicable.
yes, because of sales tax.
There's no tax on food.
Yeah, there is.
Clothing, there's no tax.
I do know that CCYBSA has the concessions up there, and they run it from May until August, 7 days a week. My wife runs it. So that's one of our organizations that people, I've heard this, that people come, they specifically don't eat because they go down to the park because the burgers are phenomenal. And that's a big money maker for CCYBSA. And competition is good, but I'd like to also see it local. If you have private entities coming in that aren't contributing to the tax base, and if they're there, let's say 4 days a week, so let's just say they're there for 4 months out of the year. The city wouldn't be getting anything out of it. The community organizations wouldn't be getting anything out of it. It's just private entity making money in Carver.
So if I may, and then, sorry, then Lori wanted to go. So I just want to, so we don't know what the use is, and it's not necessarily a hot dog and a hamburger food truck that could be competing directly with
Agreed.
CCYBSA. So, you know, in my mind, if this would be a coffee food truck, how great would it be? You know, in the past 3 months, I've had so many coffees in Chaska, and there's nothing wrong with that, but it's for lack of availability of a coffee shop in Carver. So what if any one of us were able to go and get a coffee in Community Park and sit in the shelter or do a walk and talk? You know, like, it could very much be something that doesn't cut into CCYBSA. I think this is a great thing. I have no issues with it being in a community park. I think, or any one of Carver's parks. I think especially in Community Park, it could be parked a little bit closer to the ice rink and have a very significant distance from any one of the nearest residents. Same thing with Lions Park, where there's quite a distance between. I agree that we need to figure out kind of the details, the nits, you know, the length, and making sure that we don't get something that looks too run down, and that we'll have to move and we'll be able to move if and when there's the, you know, a big event in the park where parking will already be strained.
It is.
Right. Yeah. Preach. So I would be in favor of it. I think if there would be, again, I keep going back to this in my mind being a coffee truck, you know, being able to swing by and grab a cup of coffee on my way out of town like I was able to a few months ago, you know, I think it's good. I understand about the impacts on the community. I also think that this could be a positive too, though. I know a lot of our downtown business owners are always kind of looking for an additional draw to their business, and knowing that there's more stuff that's drawing people in, even if it is a little bit of a distance away, I think that that's a good thing for our business owners.
I have some comments. When I saw this on the
She was always before you, sorry.
when I saw this on our agenda, I looked a little bit at, like, I was a little surprised that we didn't have something in place. And I looked a little bit what other cities, and not necessarily just the metro area, you know, how do they word that? How do you put restrictions on this? And I also first thought the food truck, great idea, as we get so many more day commuters with all of our construction, residential, commercial, needing somewhere to go to lunch. Have friends that are in town now working during the day. So I feel like there's a need for it. I like that idea. I would like to see it narrowed down to just downtown. And so I don't know how that could be worded, but that way it can drive more traffic, more consumers to our downtown. So maybe it's certain streets, maybe we refer to, you know, our downtown district, whatever, but something where it doesn't interfere with some of the concerns that have been expressed about a community park
But that it also helps with our desire to really promote the downtown. So if we had a food truck that just was kind of limited, and then whatever those boundaries would be, just to be in that location. That's the only comments I had to add.
I'm concerned about how much parking space would be disappearing from a truck.
Yeah, I think Christy had some, and
Hey,
Christy was waiting her
Hey guys,
turn.
I'm gonna just try to go in order here. Let's,
It's all right. This is a work session. We're all supposed to. Right.
it's good practice though.
Thank you. So I did want to, one of my questions was in conjunction with CCYBSA, because when these groups, local groups are using the parks and things like that, I'd hate to see fundraising dollars being shoved off of, away from their organization. Courtney, thank you for bringing up an opposite view, because, I'm thinking hot dog things, and to say coffee, that is a different one, and that, that broadens it up a little bit on what you're thinking about, because you kind of get, at least me, I get kind of blinded into, this is the food truck. Chaska, like, I'm just going to use Cooper's as an example. They have their food truck there. I've stopped there. Great carnitas.
Private property.
Right, and that for me, it's a commercial, private property, and they're allowing them to do it, and I don't know if they pay them or don't pay them to be there. But for me, I wouldn't have a problem if it was on a commercial property or something like that. I do have a little bit of a problem with just being in a park. I don't know. I think we could have fees that were attached to it. I'm on both sides of this, so I'm weighing both sides. Sure, we could collect some fees, and there might be some of the things where lunch or coffee or something might be something different, but how do we can't necessarily control what comes in and say, well, we'll allow this food truck, but we're not going to allow this food truck. So I think we could maybe be hurting ourselves a little bit, and hurting some of those groups a little bit. Thinking about, and then, sorry, give me just 1 second here. I've got a lot of thoughts about this going on.
What are your thoughts on location or just anywhere in city limits?
Yep, I have that too. So, and then duration of time. I don't know that I'd want to see if the food truck is, we can't control what they look like either. What if it is a jalopy looking thing and they paid their fee and now they're sitting in community park for 6 months? Another thing with downtown, I do like with events or with the shops being open, those things make sense. They seem to go together for me. When we're talking about the downtown area, if it were possibly on the main street that has more of the businesses, that would be fine. From my perspective, I don't know how the businesses might feel. I live downtown right off of that. I don't think, at least for me, I personally do not care to have a food truck running all day right in front of my house, as I think most people right out their front door would not like to walk out and look at a food truck running right outside their front door. I think the way I'm leaning right now is if it's a private business, if it's commercial property, they want to have them there, great. City might not be our business to be having those unless we're having a specific event.
I was thinking about parking. In Community Park, during the summer, people are lined up on Kirchy. Parking lot in Community Park is full. And what's the street on the backside? Yeah, people park there. As far as where it could conceivably go, Carver Depot has a big parking lot that's usually pretty vacant. I mean, if we're talking about wanting people to come in to, like your lunch crews and stuff like that, I wouldn't have an issue if it was up at the depot.
Is that not our parking lot?
That's county.
It's county's.
Glenn's talking about Casey's parking lot.
No, the trail parking lot.
Oh, the trail. I think you're talking about Casey's parking lot, though, aren't you? The old depot?
No, Depot Park. Right?
Depot.
The
The
new
bus.
parking
The
lot.
bus station.
Oh,
Bus.
we
Carver
had us
Station.
all in
We
the
were
right
all
place.
in a different location. Because he
The
said
bus
Depot
station.
Park. Carver Station.
Yeah.
Carver Station.
Excuse me.
Okay, now we're all in the same. I think
All
we
right.
just snorted.
Up at Carver Station.
Okay.
That's a huge parking lot, plenty of area there for a venue like that to operate, that it's visible, people can see it, they'd know it'd be there. And it wouldn't make people have to park elsewhere to operate their business.
So we could pick and choose if we want
If
a
it
certain
was-
area
it
to
was-
be okay and certain areas not unless there's an event, right?
Yeah.
Is that what you're kind of getting at?
Pretty much. It's open, and if there's not a lot of use up there on the back side of that lot.
The Mayor and Council, the thing that we discussed too at our meetings is, let's say it's a coffee shop. What happens if a Cup of Carver or fill in the blank coffee shop opens at either a Cup of Carver's old location, or there's a new coffee shop that goes on the United Properties site, and then we're in turn leasing space to a food truck on our property? There's going to be a certain set of complexities to that, and would you rather have the food truck, or, frankly, the business that's going to pay property taxes? So some of this is, I think, based on like what we could use for a service now, but if it's not a big stretch to walk, 6 months from now and have a duplication in services, whatever that food product is that they're delivering, and so that's where it could get complicated or complex for us.
So where I keep coming from too is just thinking, as we're increasing our daytime population, in my mind, this seems like it could be a more immediate way of
A good
serving
short-term.
folks who are looking for places to eat lunch or have coffee, or if it's a crepe, food truck. I don't know. I feel like I'm definitely in the minority here, thinking that food trucks and parks are a good thing. But I think it
I
would
don't
provide a
mind the
cool
community park if we could guide it to bring more consumers downtown. Then I would like to be able to do that, but maybe that's not a position we should take. That was my main reason for liking to gear it towards downtown.
Yeah, right. I think what we're looking at tonight is if we are allowing food trucks in city parks and not.
Just more city parks, and then,
Right, that's where you need the direction from us.
okay.
So,
Which I then now see why there'd be a reason to put a time frame. I think the two would go together.
as far as,
Like if we allow them in city parks, we need to have some type of time frame to say these number of days, or,
yes,
you know,
Yep.
kind of define all that
get carte
semi-permanent.
blanche for 3
Yeah,
years,
yeah.
yes. Yeah,
Okay.
go ahead.
So Erin, when you say that the city's been approached, what have you told this person? Have they decided, are they still looking to want to come, or?
Sure. So it was a community member that was just interested in the concept. We did say it would need to go through council, so I suspect they're either watching right now or watching in the future as part of this discussion. But knowing food trucks, and they're kind of a hot ticket item right now, so I don't think this is the last we're going to hear about them in the next couple of years, just because it's becoming a pretty viable market for restaurants to go on wheels.
Can I ask, maybe this is a dumb question, but from our existing commercial properties and potentially future commercial properties, can they lease space to a food truck? Is there anything that we, as a city, could do to stop them from doing that?
The parking lots on commercial sites are generally private, so
Okay.
they would typically, I would suspect they would still need to go through the permitting process,
Okay.
but,
So if Carver
Property.
Dental wanted to put a food truck in their parking lot, they could?
so that one gets a little bit tricky because it's a shared parking ordinance, so it would be
Okay.
all of them to, Fleet Farm, let's go with Fleet Farm.
Okay, let's go something simple, one tenant, Fleet Farm. Okay,
Great.
so they could do that.
It would be more palatable likely at Fleet Farm compared to Carver Square.
Okay.
I would, two things. The parking at Community Park is, to me, a good problem to have. I live very close to it, have kids in the programs. There are a few times a year where, yes, the parking is awful, but that means it's being used, and we haven't even used the new ball fields up by Carver Elementary yet. So I like seeing when there's overflow parking. It means we're growing, it's getting used, and it's really a few times a year. maybe there would be some type of verbiage to put in, however this gets drawn up, whether it's an ordinance or application and they pay a fee, where there's certain weekends that if the firefighters are having a major fundraiser, the Black Sox are, if CCY BSA is having a fundraiser, that they get dibs. And maybe we just,
And potentially, talking about restrictive ordinances, we could be as restrictive as we wanted to, saying you could
No hot
operate
dogs?
between the hours of,
yeah,
6
those
a.m.
hours.
and 4 p.m. or,
Right.
whatever it is,
Right.
Monday through Thursday, So I think that the direction that Erin needs is if we want to move forward thinking about allowing food trucks in city parks.
I think besides events, that the person who's hosting the events, for me, I think that I would prefer that they went on a private parking lot of a business or such. So that would be what that's my preference.
Glenn?
Agreed.
Okay. Y'all know I'm a yes. Right?
I'm open. I feel like it needs to be defined more, and that's, yeah, that's where I sit. Do you want more?
A solid maybe is fine.
Yeah, so I'm trying to envision how I get to a yes. And I think, your suggestions about having it being very restrictive about hours, not impacting parking, because there aren't huge events during those hours, et cetera, maybe we can come up with something so restrictive that it's okay. But,
And to be clear, I'm not a huge fan of super restrictive ordinances,
No,
but
neither
we're at the ground floor on this, and we can
yeah.
make it
So
what we want.
I'm open if it's restrictive. Doesn't compete with our CCYBA, whatever that acronym is. Sorry, I apologize. I'm newer to having my kids in the sports, but so as long as it's not competitive to that, we think that it's serving that need of the daytime population, right? Which I think is the gap that we're trying to solve.
In my mind, yeah.
Yep. And I do agree with you on that aspect, that we don't have that. Hopefully we get that as our city continues to grow and we get that coffee shop back and all those sorts of things. So if it gets it restrictive to meet that need, then I could be a yes.
So I think
Is it gonna be, would it be seasonal? Would we think about putting seasonal restrictions on also?
I think we can put whatever restrictions we want on it at this point.
Well, I do know that CCYBSA the Black Sox, they also have the concessions up there on Sundays, Saturdays, and every day in the week, all summer long, from May to August. It's busy up there. Like I said, I think putting a private food truck in a community park, I'd rather have it on private property. If United Properties so desires to put a food truck in conjunction with whatever possibly coming down the pike, Fleet Farm, Lakeview, if they put a food truck up there, I wouldn't have an issue with it. It's all private.
But you can't have an issue with it because it's private,
Yeah, because it's
to
private.
be clear. But yeah.
Well,
But
that's
yes,
just it.
yes.
But in community park, realistically, there's community park, Lions Park. I wouldn't foresee anybody parking on a Depot Park, and Bluffs Park. Those are primarily the fields that we have operating, right? I think they take up too much parking space in the parks and would definitely put a damper into some of the community fundraising that goes on within, and they'd feel an impact from it. Competition is good as long as it's on private property.
I just want to be mindful of time. I get what you're saying. I also worry about, the Black Sox, CCYBSA do a lot of good for our community. Getting kids outside and active is a really good thing, and I wouldn't want to do anything to diminish their charitable efforts. That said, I don't want this whole discussion to kind of revolve around
One
one
organization.
organization.
I get it.
You know, I think we need to take a broader look. So, do we have any other comments on this topic? Do you have what you need from us? I think what we're saying is, let's continue to explore this. We're interested in something that's a little bit more restrictive.
Okay.
The
And
majority.
I'll work with Larry Harris, the city attorney, about some of these things that we maybe could restrict, other things that might get a little bit tricky.
Because, the next step is to have this at a council meeting where we could hear some public feedback, and maybe that's would be helpful too.
I agree.
Okay.
Agree. Good.
All right. City manager's report, Mr. Mareck.
I just have a few things. I'll segue into, we're going to meet with the Black Sox next week to talk about their regional tournament, get an idea of some of the logistics and how we can work together. We completed a draft of a field scheduling policy that we're going to bring to the next work session. So that's for Ironwood Park and all our other ball fields. Just a reminder that we have our goal setting a week from Thursday, so late Thursday afternoon and then Friday morning. So I'm still working with Richard Fersman on a detailed schedule or agenda that I can send out, and then we're planning on doing a kind of a next step into what some of you might remember as that insights model, where we're different colors, the red, blue, green, yellow. So for those of you that haven't taken it, there'll be an opportunity to take that new, and then we'll do an exercise. I don't know the details of it, that will kind of bring that all together and give us an opportunity to understand each other a little bit better. So fun times. And finally, the 2018 storm sewer project. So you'll remember there are two big phases to that. One is the downtown sluice gate work down in Riverside Park. We're redoing that structure. And then the second piece was a pipe project that went along County Road 11 from kind of behind Carver Square and then down County Road 11. The county has looked at that project and sees some opportunities to leverage what they might want to do in the future along County Road 11, since that part of County Road 11 might be improved at some point in the future. So what they have proposed to the city is that they're going to do a water study or a hydraulic study to look at the flows and see if there are ways that they can maximize our resources with what they intend to do in the future, so essentially partner. So they're going to pay for, on their own, they're going to pay for a study, or like to pay for a study to look at ways that we can combine resources and then come back to the city. And so we met with them this morning. So what we'd like to respond to them is that we're open to that. It would delay the project from getting completed in the spring to most likely this fall. And I just wanted to make sure that was okay with the council.
Yes. Yep. Sure.
That's all I have.
All right. Any city council requests? No?
No.
All right. Who wants to make a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Motion by Councilmember Henry,
Second.
second by Councilmember Mock. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. All right. See you in 1 minute.